Hello everyone, welcome back to the Aspergian Journal. To neurotypical people who have biased and uncaring minds, they might see special interests relating to autistic people as weird and obsessive and find it just unnatural. Whereas to autistic people, special interests are areas of where they can explore their passions for things and that bring them joy, knowledge and skills to help them navigate themselves in a neurotypical world. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, one of the diagnostic criteria for autism is individuals that display or have restricted, repetitive patterns of behaviours, interests, or activities. What you will find, autistic people, when they are relishing into one of their favourite special interests, it can be very hard and difficult to get them to discuss something else because they get too absorbed into what they have a passion in. Special interests and that can vary from something that is broad in subject, like football, or it can be something specific, like knowing the specifications of trains and that were built in the 19th century. And these special interests can be founded upon having the depthness of intellectual knowledge or having physical collections of items that represent their passion in a certain special interest. In history, society has shown to have negative perceptions of when it comes to describing special interests of autistic people as inflexible or obsessive, to the point where various therapists and psychiatrists have tried to get individuals to reshape their behaviours connecting to special interests by reducing the need of them, as they can be seen as repetitive or intense and may cause psychological harm or hinder their social development. However, autistic advocates like myself will massively defend against that notion by saying that special interests play a very important and fulfilling part in an autistic person's learning and well-being. And this is the biggest differentiation that I have come across on many times, where you have therapists and psychiatrists are so focused on the medical side, textbook side of autism, and they think it's something that has to be resolved or has to be cured, and whereas for autistic people like myself, we have the living experience of what it means to be an autist, to live with autism. And a lot of autistic people, they don't want to change who they are, and because autism makes them the people that they are, instead of where psychologists feel like it's something that has to be resolved. And that is where this contention and that has always stood against the test of time. And I think as a community, we should not allow those negative perceptions that are held by medical professionals to stop us from achieving and living our lives to the fullest in the way that we see fit, and always strive by the notion that we can achieve a lot more than what society think that we can. Like neurotypical people who also can have interests that they like and bring joy to their lives. Special interests, they can change and evolve as autistic people get older and they develop more life experiences, whilst there can be certain interests that can stay with individuals lifelong. As a child, I obsessively watched all episodes of Mr. Bean, a British sitcom in the 1990s starring Rowan Atkinson, and I still like that comedy even to this day, even though I don't obsessively watch it as I did as a child, because obviously my interests have broadened and expanded over time. Rowan Atkinson and that has starred in many other comedy sitcoms and films like Blackadder, The Thin Blue Line and Johnny English, and still remains as one of my favourite comedians of all time. Even though I do have many more, but it's amazing on how certain things and that we like as children can still remain and evolve as we get older. As I got into my teenager years, I got into watching Top Gear with Jeremy Clarkson, James May and Richard Hammond, and which was a programme that ran in its reboot format from 2002 to 2015, and at its peak, and that used to reach around 315 million viewers across the world. But despite the reboot, actually the Top Gear programme actually dates back to 1990, where many other motoring journalists were part of the programme before it got scrapped in 1998 and then it got rebooted in 2002. And Jeremy was actually the original creator of the show, and I think he played a massive contribution towards its success. The episode that got my attention into Top Gear was a race that the trio did, where it was a car versus public transport, where Jeremy was in an Aston Martin DB9 and Richard and James had to do a combination of buses, high-speed trains and aviation travel to get to their destination from Guildford in the UK to Monte Carlo in Monaco, covering a distance of over 900 miles. Despite all the modern innovations and development in fast commercial travel, the car won the race, and in fine British fashion as well. You cannot beat a good old British V12 power. My love for Aston Martins and cars overall led to me developing my passion for the James Bond franchise. The character of James Bond was the creation of renowned writer and author Ian Fleming during the 1950s, where his inspiration for spy novels, and that came from his time when he served in the Naval Intelligence Division in Britain during the Second World War. The connection between James Bond and Aston Martin date back to the 1960s, where a silver birch coloured Aston Martin DB5 appeared in the 1964 film Goldfinger, starring Sean Connery. The film that got me interested in the franchise was Casino Royale in 2006, starring Daniel Craig as the sixth actor to play James Bond. The only reason I went to see that film was because there was a theatre poster outside a cinema showing showing an Aston Martin DBS, and which was actually a star of the film, and which then also strengthened the relationship between the Bond franchise and Aston Martin as a car manufacturer. And I just went to see the film just because of that. I remember a scene where Bond crashes the DBS and flips it around 7.5 times, which was actually a Guinness World Record for the number of flips a car does. And I remember seeing that scene very clearly, and I felt sorry for the car more than the actor or the stunt double that did that stunt, and that as part of that scene. And I felt like, well, that's 162 grand car gone for the burden. The Aston Martin DB5 has appeared in a number of James Bond films over the course of its franchise, with the recent film being No Time to Die in 2021, which actually was Daniel Craig's last outing as 007. My interest in 007 then leads to me developing an interest for Scotch whiskies. In the 2012 film Skyfall, Bond and his boss M, played by Dame Judi Dench, drink the Macallan Scotch whisky at various points in the film. The Macallan is a Scotch whisky brand founded by Alexander Reid in Scotland in 1824, and the whisky brand is well renowned by collectors around the world and auction houses, where some of its most expensive bottles of whisky have been sold at auction. A most recent example, in November 2023, a bottle of Macallan 1926 was sold at Sotheby's auction house in London for £2.1 million, making it the most expensive bottle of whisky to ever be sold. My late grandfather was also a whisky drinker, who sadly passed away around the time when this interest into Scotch whiskies started. So I'd like to think that my interest in this particular subject honours his memory to a certain degree. That said, I'm not really a massive alcohol drinker. I am more of an amateur connoisseur kind of drinker, where I like, delving into the history of whiskey brands, and that has expanded into like French cognac, wines, and that from different regions of the world, Belgian ales, British ciders and beers and so on. And I think that a lot of this and that has been inspired really from my love and that for the 007 franchise. So it just goes to show on how these interests and how they develop from one thing and then evolve into another and then another, and it just broadens out into a wide spectrum of different interests that just shows how someone can be passionate about certain things. To answer the question of this video, what are special interests and how do they relate to the autistic community? We have to really look at, what are the pros and cons of having special interests as an autistic person. Well, when you look at the pros first, this having special interests, it does help them develop their confidence and self-esteem, and as this can develop their expertise in these subjects and have a sense of pride in their knowledge and accomplishments, they can help with emotional regulation and stress relief, to bring a calm sense of state and and to be able to manage a chaotic world and to serve as a coping mechanism for stress and anxiety. It can also be about learning and skill development, where their knowledge and skill can be valuable in various aspects of life, and depending on what they are, they can influence their career paths. So let's say if someone is interested in engineering, that might influence what kind of career that they want to go into. Or if someone is passionate about photography, they might want to maybe eventually use their skills to start up their own photography business. So it's amazing on how certain interests can lead from being a hobby to actually something that they can actually turn into a business and make money of. It can also help with social connection. However, there is a caveat there. Special interests relating to social connection can only really work if the optics of interaction are correct, in terms of being in groups of people where they have that shared special interest and which then helps with interaction more better, rather than being in a situation where you have a special interest, let's say for food, but you're mixing with people that might have a different interest altogether. So there's never going to be able to have that connecting point of view. It can also help having a sense of joy and pride, to express themselves, of having, a purpose and meaning, as well as having motivation to be fully immersed, and that which might help increase their focus and productivity. But there's always a flip side to this. When you look at the cons of having special interests as an autistic person, because they have an intense focus on their special interest, this can lead to social isolation, especially if they prioritise their interest over social interactions. But as I've stated in a previous video about how to manage friendships and loneliness, it's about mixing with people that have those shared interests, and which then allows the autistic person to open up more. Where if they were in a situation where they're mixing with a group of people that talk about something entirely different to what the autistic person finds enjoyment in, you will find that the autistic person and that will clam up and really close themselves inwards and keep themselves to themselves, and then that's how it can have issues with building connections with others. So having the right optics is very important to be able for the autistic person to flourish in those situations. having difficulty of being flexible, because they can get so absorbed into their special interest. Sometimes it's hard to shift their focus away from it and onto other things. And this can also have issues with challenge it and have challenges of adapting to new situations or tasks, which is important. So it's about having a balance between being able to develop the skills that you need to be able to survive everyday life, but also, don't neglect the things that do bring you joy in life. You are who you are, and you have the right to have interests in things that you like. Like for me, I like my cars, and many other things. There's no problem of having those interests, and you shouldn't give them up because somebody else might have an adverse opinion of them. It's just just knowing that there's always a time and a place to explore that enjoyment and not let it stop you from being productive and focused on what you want to achieve in life. And obviously, if you do have an interest that you can eventually turn into a business, then you're quids in, aren't you? But other cons can be where they might struggle with transitioning or have obsessive behaviours and limited social interaction. So, as I've said earlier, if there is certain interests that an autistic person has that can cause them, that can be a danger to them or a danger to others, obviously then intervention would need to take place to keep themselves safe and others safe as well. And obsessions, like with anything, they have to be managed and regulated in a proper way to stop them from having impact in other aspects of one's life. And also it's important to keep your mental health overall in check, because you don't want to put the autistic person under distress or anxiety if they're having to if you have to force them to stop engaging in that special interest, which can make that transition stages in life very hard. Like autistic people are so that they like routines, and let's say if you're leaving one routine situation and going somewhere else, it's very hard to make that transition, and it has to be done in a proper way. So let's say, you leave the school system, leave primary school and go to secondary school. It's a totally different experience, and I know it's nerve-wracking for anyone, but for an autistic person, they might need extra support to be able to manage that transition more succinctly and effectively. To bring this all together, you'll quickly understand that special interests play an important role in an autistic person's life, and it is something that you cannot take for granted or to abuse in any way. Autistic people have every right to have certain interests as much as a neurotypical person has. One of the biggest common denominators I've witnessed is where neurotypical people will question autistic people for their interests, sometimes from a place of arrogance or misunderstanding, but they will not accept or allow their interests to be questioned and that by others, which then highlights a level of hypocrisy on their behalf. By showcasing the depthness of my special interests in particular, it demonstrates that interests, they can grow and evolve over time, and they do play an important role in an autistic person's development in terms of their knowledge, their critical thinking and expertise in various subjects. Despite the cons of special interests highlighting the risk of limited social interaction, flexibility, and managing challenges on multiple levels in general life, the pros of special interests do outweigh more strongly in terms of improving emotional regulation and stress relief for autistic people, aid in their learning and development, and provides purpose and excitement in scenarios when anxiety can occur and you're having to mitigate the feelings of anxiousness in that situation. My advice to autistic people is to continue with your enjoying your special interests as long as they do not harm you or anyone else, and always have an open mindset when it comes to delving into newer interests that might catch your attention, as these can deepen your knowledge, enjoyment and purpose in life, which can also lead to career and life opportunities in the future. As always, thank you.